Hello guys! Today we're going to talk about what makes a stable society, and we're going to explain it in Minecraft. The main purpose of this video is to help people who are trying to create interesting and realistic world building for their Minecraft worlds or other creative projects. Some of the sociological and anthropological theories in this video might be a little bit hard to understand without examples, which is why I have created a little diagram here, or a little diorama, to show you what I'm talking about. So this is a little example of an Enderman society, and we're going to see what keeps the Enderman society stable, and then we're going to break it down at a theory level. If we start at this little island here we see that not everyone in the Enderman society is actually an Enderman. Some of them are piglins, and they live in these little houses built out of traditional piglin materials, like blackstone and crimson wood. Now the piglins are technically part of the Enderman society. You can see that they're on one of the end islands, and there is actually a way for them to get up and down. So they have a bit of mobility. They can get at least from outside of society to the first level. Now, to complicate this a little bit more, we can see that not everybody is allowed into the Enderman society. For instance, villagers are not. They are kept very specifically outside of the bounds of Enderman society, and they're kept here by the piglins. So the Endermen themselves never actually come down here. It's the piglins who are doing the job of keeping all of the villagers outside of the bounds of Enderman society. Here at the middle level, we can complicate things even a little bit further. We have here a little bit of a diorama of what might be an Enderman religion. So we can see that there are some important social institutions that make up the Enderman society. We can also see, though, that hanging off the edge of this island is a piece of TNT directly over the piglin village. So there is some kind of threat keeping the piglins in line if they don't behave. Now, if we come up to the last of these end islands, you will see that there is an Enderman king, and he's sitting on a big throne, and you can see that at the top here, he has a dragon egg. The same symbol that we saw in the Enderman religion. So a bit of a recap, we see that there is a monarchy that gets some religious powers. There is a religious structure that keeps people sort of socially bonded and tied. There is some kind of threat of violence over people who live on the edges of society. The people on the edges of society have a bit of mobility, but they can never technically make it all the way up to the top. And a lot of what they do is actually policing the borders and making sure that not everybody is allowed into society. So now we're going to talk about the sociological and anthropological theories behind all of this and what makes a stable society. So one of the most obvious ones you might see is the use of fear. Fear is what you might call the oldest trick in the book. If you think about things like military conquests or the use of police forces, the military, the use of violence has always been used to keep some sort of law and order in society. Let's actually break down some of these ideas. For one, fear is often tied to dictatorships. Because dictators tend to seize powers in ways that are unconstitutional, they don't tend to have the same kind of legitimacy, so they need physical violence to keep people in check. But fear is very unstable. People don't like being afraid. So fundamentally, fear by itself will never make a fully stable society. If you want to world build a Minecraft society that is kind of on the brink of collapse, you might want to have a lot of militarism and fear and a big police presence to show how things are being degraded. Fear is tied to some of these lofty ideas like law and order. So Thomas Hobbes was an old Enlightenment philosopher who said that a society functions through law and order. And an old one of these philosophers was Max Weber, who said that the government has the monopoly on legitimate violence. Now, legitimate violence sounds like a bit of an abstract concept, so let me put it this way. If, for instance, a civilian killed a police officer, they would get sent to jail. If a police officer kills a civilian, they will usually get something like paid vacation or paid sick leave. Even more so, if you're a member of the military and you shoot someone, that's just part of your job because you're part of an officially government-sanctioned institution that commits violence. So fear does have its place, and some people have argued that fear is really important, that violence is important for maintaining things like law and order, but we can also see that fear is not enough to make this whole system work. There's a lot more steps to this whole Enderman society than just a single piece of TNT, even though it is always lingering there above the piglin village. The divine right to rule is another one of those really old ideas on what makes a society stable. Again, if we think about those old kind of empires, you can think about the Empire of Rome, for instance. Well, the Roman emperors were also part of the Roman religion. They basically ruled through divine right. At the same time, we can look at civilizations in medieval Europe. So a lot of those classic kings had the divine right to rule. In China, there was what was called the Mandate of Heaven. The people had the right to rule through the idea that heaven or God or some kind of spiritual realm was giving them the authority to rule. So what does the divine right to rule actually do for a society? Why does it matter that the Enderman King has an end dragon on his throne and that he's kind of calling back to the Enderman religion? Well, it comes down to some of these ideas. For instance, caste. You might have heard of the caste system in India, but a caste system in general means a social system where there are people at the top and people in the middle and people at the bottom, and those positions don't change. People are stuck in these very rigid social structures based on the families that they are born into. And in a lot of societies, these kind of castes are based off of some kind of proximity to God or proximity to the spiritual realm. So priests will often make up a very high caste in society. The caste system creates stability because people can't challenge their position because it is divinely ordained. If you were born poor and you know that the way you were born was God's intention for you, it's really hard to break out of that mold. So you're not really likely to challenge these social structures that keep you poor because, as far as you know, that was what God intended for you. We can also talk about theocracies. So these are societies where the leader is also a religious leader. I mentioned ancient Rome, but technically England is also kind of a theocracy because the leader of the English monarchy is also the leader of the English church. You can also think about Vatican City for Catholicism, and there are plenty of other societies that have been led by big religious figures. We can also talk about ideas of God-given justice. So here we can look back to some of our old Christian philosophers like St. Augustine of Hippo and St. Thomas Aquinas. And God-given justice is just the idea that the law systems that we have in our society were given to us by some kind of religious authority. So for instance, why would the Piglins or the Endermen revolt against the Enderman King when, as far as they know, all the laws that the Enderman King passes come down directly from God? If all the laws in society exist that way because God wanted them that way, then that's the way that they should be staying, and therefore there's no reason to overthrow the government. And lastly, this gets into issues of consent, because all of these things we've talked about, like the theocracy, the caste system, God-given justice, the mandate of heaven, they create a system where people consent to be ruled. It doesn't matter whether the Piglins technically have the numbers advantage over the Endermen. It doesn't matter whether there are 1 million villagers and 1 Enderman in the whole world, because the villagers genuinely believe that they are where they're supposed to be, so they consent to the system. They don't want to overthrow it. As we saw with the villagers though, it's not only about whether or not they believe in the Enderman religion. There's a lot more to it than that. It's actually not only about fear at all. It's about a whole system of inclusion and exclusion. And this is a big part of what makes a stable society. It's the ability to basically set up a border or a limit around a society and decide what makes people able to enter and exit. So why don't we talk about some of these social theories? At a basic level, we can talk about Anne Stoller's idea of the border and the frontier. So I just said that societies have limits, but whether you think that those limits are basically a line in the sand or a kind of gray zone is whether you believe in the border or the frontier. And actually, it can get a bit more complicated. So why don't we talk about something like US American society? Well, American society does have a literal border. It has the United States-Mexico border, so that keeps people in and it keeps people out. At another very real level though, there is a kind of frontier system. So for instance, there are levels of citizenship and work visas, so not everybody who lives within the US border is technically a US citizen. And not everybody who is a US citizen is considered truly American. For instance, what we're seeing with the current US government is that even people who are considered legal immigrants are not truly considered American in the eyes of the government. Anne Stoller would say that there is always a level of an interior frontier even once you get past the border. Now, we can actually see this again in the Enderman Society, because these piglins have the ability to come up through the staircase and come into the piglin village, right? But they're not Endermen. They can't teleport up to the higher islands. So there is an interior division that the piglins can't get over. But why don't we talk about some of these other ideas? For instance, Peggy McIntosh talked about white privilege. So McIntosh would say that while there are a bunch of islands, the point of this is to preserve a state where at the core, at the very center of the Enderman Society, is a group of people who benefit from the whole system. So in American society, you could call this white privilege, but in the Enderman Society, you could say that it might be Enderman privilege. For instance, maybe the Endermen don't have a block of TNT above their heads, so they don't have to live in that same kind of fear as the piglins do. They have closer access to their religion, and they can actually teleport wherever they want, so they have freedom of movement. Being an Enderman gives you certain privileges in society, and these privileges are maintained by the fact that there is no bridge between these islands. We can complicate this even a little bit further. So we can also talk about assimilation and hegemony. Now, again, these are some pretty big words, so why don't we break it down just a little bit? Hegemony is an idea that is really tied to a couple of philosophers, Michel Foucault and Antonio Gramsci. And hegemony is the idea that a society tries to make basically everyone within it a certain kind of way. So it tries to homogenize or make everyone a little bit the same. So for instance, in the Enderman Society, we could say that all the Endermen are basically the same. Not all the Endermen are at the same level as the Enderman King, but from our perspective, they're all just Endermen. They all follow the same religion, they all live in the same place, and they all see themselves as very distinct from both the piglins and the villagers. So there is a kind of internal sameness to the system that keeps it very stable. Because the Endermen all feel similar, they all feel like they belong to the main Enderman Society. And of course, people know about the hegemony in the system. So there's a reason why the piglins do the work of trying to keep the villagers out. And it's that the piglins want to remain in society and they want to approach Enderman status. So the more that they reinforce the kind of boundary, the more they keep the villagers out and insist that there is something different about the villagers, the more they protect their own status and the more they approach the Enderman status. And hegemony has one of those frontier situations that we were just talking about. So people can always come in and out of the hegemony when it's beneficial to the main power structure. So for instance, if there was something like a big villager riot, you can imagine that all of a sudden, a lot of these Endermen wouldn't be pushing the idea that the piglins are part of a separate group. They'd say, hey piglins, we're all part of the same society, man. So why don't you go down there and take care of it? Because you and me, piglins, we're basically the same. We all belong to Enderman Society. We all live on the End Islands, and those villagers, they don't. In times when there is a big power shift in society, you might see the hegemony come to include more people or fewer people. The other idea that I put on this sign here is assimilation, and this is tied to philosophers like Hadid Ghafaiti and Etienne Balibar. So assimilation is basically the process where people come into the hegemony. Assimilation is that inclusion part of inclusion and exclusion. So assimilation basically says you can be part of the hegemony, but you have to do so-and-so. And usually that so-and-so means leaving behind a part of your culture or part of your society in order to join our culture and our society. So the Enderman might say, hey piglins, if you want to come live on this island, you need to start building out of purple instead of your traditional crimson and blackstone materials. Or if we want to be really ridiculous with it, the Enderman might say, actually, all Endermen are supposed to be 3 blocks tall and the piglins are only 2 blocks tall, so they should all be wearing stilts. And once all the piglins wear stilts, then we will finally allow them into Enderman Society because they will finally be 3 blocks tall. Now, of course, this is a bit of a ridiculous thing, but you can understand the way that assimilation works in real life. You can join the society or the culture, but you have to meet these conditions that basically always come out to abandoning a part of your own culture or society. And finally, this is going to get into ideas of ethnicity and racialization. But the point of this is that a society or a nation basically creates ethnicity and races out of whatever it touches, because ethnicity and race are really easy ways to classify and then control people. So if you remember, the whole point of this video is stability. When you create something like an ethnicity, you create a stable group of people that you can then rule over. So because an ethnicity is a group of people who inherently believe that they have some sort of common past or destiny or future, that they have something fundamentally in common and that they belong together, they're very easy to rule as a group of people because they won't question the fact that they're all being grouped together. So if you look at nation building processes in the past, for instance, the nation of France was built through the creation of a French national identity. France basically took all these different groups of people like the Basques, the Occitans, the Lombards, the Burgundians, people in Piedmont, people in Brittany, Normandy, Picardy, and they said, you guys are all French and everybody outside of France does not belong to the French identity. So in this way, people stopped fighting amongst each other in France and they started believing in a greater whole, which made them easy to rule over as a single French nation. And this is also why nationalism is tied to things like imperialism and colonialism. Because when somebody from Normandy and somebody from Brittany in France both go to Africa and they encounter Senegalese, they start to believe that they have a lot more in common with each other than they do with the Senegalese person. So that's why colonialism is historically tied to a really strong process of the creation of ethnicity and racialization. So again, we're in Minecraft here, so if you want to actually talk about some of these ideas, well, you could create real-world border posts in your societies. You could create areas of your cities where people are basically assimilating, and you can create architecture that shows that people are buying into the dominant culture. You can show privilege for certain groups. For instance, you could create big mansions that are all in one neighborhood and they all have something in common with each other. And you could create slums in a neighborhood and you could say that all those people have something in common with each other. And you could even do something like this, where you show that the policing of the borders of the society is never done by the people who are like fully in the center. It's always done by people who are at the margins. You could show something like a Minecraft village being protected from zombies by a group of iron golems, and then you could show that the iron golems are not actually treated well in society, that the iron golems actually live in these kind of gross dungeons under the city, or that they live in these slums on the outskirts of town. But in any case, there are a ton of really fascinating ways you could take this if you want to get into ideas of stability in Minecraft. So, social cohesion is fundamentally one of those really strong ideas of what makes a society stable. This is tied to structural functionalism. So structural functionalism is an idea tied to philosophers like Emile Durkheim and Mary Douglas, and it's the idea that a society basically functions like a living organism or like a machine, where all the different parts support and reinforce each other and create something that is stable and unmoving. So what does this really get down to? Well, there is a big focus on consent and shared values. So again, we're seeing that word consent come up. But here, instead of looking at something like religion as a structure that keeps people in place, we can look at it as a structure that creates shared values. So of course, people who all share one religion would sort of feel some kind of kinship towards one another. The more people have similar ideas, the more they believe themselves to belong to something greater than themselves. Emile Durkheim, who we have mentioned on a couple of these signs, basically said that as a society becomes more and more complex, as people have less in common with each other in their kind of day-to-day lives, you can think about like two farmers have farming in common. But as we move towards a society where you're a farmer and I'm an accountant and my friend Bill is working in a chemistry lab, there becomes an increased need for us to have shared ideas in common and shared values. And this is what he called mechanical solidarity, but the actual terms don't matter. The real focus here is on shared values and shared morality and shared norms. And a big part of what makes this is shared institutions. So of course, I've already mentioned religion as a big institution, but school is really big, and school is going to come up through a couple of these different ones. For instance, when we talk about assimilation and making people sort of all believe that they have to belong to one very strict society, that is going to rely a lot on the way that people are brought up and educated in schools. Of course, the family is a really important institution. Other sort of socializing groups, you can think about things like the Boy Scouts or guilds. So again, I know a lot of you guys are interested in like medieval society. So belonging to organizations, corporations, guilds, brotherhoods, all that kind of stuff is going to make people sort of have a sense of social cohesion. It's all reinforcing the chain. And Benedict Anderson basically said that the creation of the printing press was one of these really important things, because when everybody wakes up and reads the newspaper together, or when everybody can read the same mass-produced books, there is a shared sense that we all belong to one society, one culture. 10,000 people reading the Daily Mail in the morning, and 10,000 people knowing that 9,999 other people are reading the Daily Mail at the exact same time reinforces the sense that we all belong to one stable big thing. Of course, we can talk about some critiques of this. So I will get into a couple of these by Jean Baudrillard, Barbara Ehrenreich, and Frantz Fanon. And basically their point is that yes, social cohesion is real, but it's not good. So this whole time I've been talking about a stable society as if it is fundamentally a good thing. And in some ways it is, and in some ways it is a matter of opinion. So some of these philosophers have said that the way that this whole system works, especially the way that social cohesion is created and maintained, is fundamentally manipulative. All three of these critics basically say that social cohesion comes at the cost of the individual, and that what you give into society is always matched by some kind of big personal sacrifice. So Frantz Fanon was writing about Black subjectivity, and he said that in a post-colonial context, that is, in a world where colonialism has happened, the Black subject defines himself by his relationship to his old master, and the old white master defines himself by his relationship to the old Black subject, and so feels superior. And whether or not you agree with that, Fanon's point was basically that these social systems and the way that stability is maintained has a really big psychic damage on the person, especially when it's not an even society. Fanon basically asks us to consider what happens to the mind of the Enderman King and what happens to the mind of the villager and the piglin in this kind of system, and what kind of damage is being done here. Jean Baudrillard says that the society asks you to give up so much, to sacrifice so much for it, but it doesn't actually give you that much in return. What it gives you is the false promise of gratification. So society, and Baudrillard was here writing about advertising, society promises all these things, and it says that it's going to do so and so for you, and that you will feel the cohesion, you will feel the love, you will feel attached to all these people, and that if you buy a Snickers bar, it'll be the best chocolate of your life, and that if you buy a Snickers bar, all you have to do is go to work for 30 minutes making minimum wage and you can buy the best Snickers bar of your life, and everybody else is doing it. You just have to go to work, man. And Baudrillard says it's not a fair exchange. You give up your entire life, your entire agency, and in return, you're never fully properly gratified. And Barbara Ehrenreich said something similar. She was writing about optimism. And she said, well, social cohesion is maintained through the optimism culture. Through the idea of optimism, you create a subject, that is to say, just like a person who constantly feels like they have to be happier, that they have to improve themselves. And they're constantly trying to improve themselves without really focusing on the problems within the institution. So Ehrenreich's critique is that this kind of social cohesion model puts a lot on the individual, and it's basically a form of giving you all the responsibility for everything wrong in society. Now, you don't have to agree with any of these critiques of social cohesion or with anything I've said, but the point of this specific argument is to show that at the heart of all of your world building, at the heart of all of this politics, is the human mind, and it will react a certain way to whatever kind of politics you're putting into your Minecraft world. A lot of people will be critical of whatever situation you put them in, and you can try to explore that in your world building and in the stories that you're telling. So looking back at our starting question of what makes a stable society, well, there are a lot of things, and a lot of them can exist together. Fear can create a somewhat stable society, at least in the very short term. divine right, or the idea that people are in their place for a greater reason, can keep a lot of people supporting the government. The ideas of exclusion and inclusion, of borders and frontiers, and violently looping people into society or violently keeping them out. The ideas of creating social cohesion by basically manipulating people or by creating institutions for shared values and shared morality systems. All of these things will contribute to a Minecraft society or a real life society that is fundamentally pretty stable. And every society that you can think of has used some combination of all of these things at every point throughout history. It is now up to you to take this knowledge and think about how you want to incorporate it into your own Minecraft worlds, and fundamentally ask yourself, is the society I've been creating in my Minecraft world stable? Is it unstable? And which of these is more interesting? And how can I come up with some really cool storytelling ideas and some really cool builds that will embody these really abstract theories in ways that are interesting and emotional and meaningful, and above all, that make me feel creatively fulfilled? That is going to do it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe. Feel free to join the Discord. If there's something that you think I missed or something that you disagree with, leave a comment down below. If you've been creating a society that you've now realized is really unstable, or better yet, you've been creating a society that you now realize is actually pretty stable, feel free to talk about it in the comments or in the Discord. My next video is going to be on the politics and the real world systems that go into industrialization and the Industrial Revolution. And after that, we will see where things take us. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.